Hi, I'm Monica Poole, a Quilter to Go pattern designer and sewing tutor from Australia. Today's topic is how to add a Quilter to Go border, and in this video I'm going to show you a really easy way. And it's also a good way to increase a quilt that you've already made and you'd like it to be bigger, you haven't added the binding yet, and you can actually make it bigger using this method. To show you how it's done, I'm going to use our Fifi Flamingo applique pattern that I quilted in the last video, and I'm going to make it really scrappy, and I'm going to add continuous borders around the outside edge. We have a large range of applique patterns on our website, and some other designs that I think would really suit a quilt center would be Elka the Elephant, Billy the Blue Whale, Tommy the T-Rex and Una the Unicorn. They're all available to purchase as PDF downloads from our website. So let's get started. First of all, trim away the excess batting and backing so that all edges are level and your applique is nice and straight. The size of my quilted section is 17 inches by 22 inches. Your borders can be any width that you like. For this scrappy quilt, I've put together a variety of dark pink and light pink fabrics from my stash. I've cut 4.5 inch strips that I've then cut into random lengths ranging in size from 2.5 inches to 6.5 inches. For the back of the borders, I've cut strips that are 4.5 inches wide, and for the batting, I've cut strips that are 4.25 inches wide. There's no actual pattern for this quilt, I'm just making it up as I go along. To make the borders, I've joined all of my light pink pieces together, and I've joined all of my dark pink fabrics together. And I've joined them with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but I haven't pressed those seams yet, and I'll let you know why soon. To frame our applique, I'm going to add a peeper. So this is a 1 inch wide strip of fabric. I've pressed it in half lengthwise with the wrong sides facing, and I'm going to sew it onto both opposite edges of the applique first with the raw edges aligned, and then I'm going to sew it onto the top and onto the bottom edge. The seam allowance for this project is 1/4 inch. I recommend using your walking foot, so either find a guide on your foot or move your needle position over slightly so that you'll be able to have a 1/4 inch seam. I'm using a 1/4 inch attachment that snaps on to my walking foot. So here's our peeper sewn on, and I did take slightly less than 1/4 inch seam allowance so that when I sew the borders on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, the stitching line won't be seen. Okay, so let's sew our first border on. I'm going to take a light strip first of all, and I'm going to cut a length which is approximately 1/2 inch longer than the side edge of our applique. I'm going to cut a length of fabric for my backing, which is about the same. I'll cut that bit of selvage off there, just like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press my seams now, and I just wanted to make sure that my seams are going to be pressed down so they're going in the same direction that I'm going to sew. To sew my border on, I'm going to take a back strip and I'm going to place that right sides together with the edge of the quilt. And what I'm going to do just to hold that in place is use a couple of dabs of fabric glue, flip over to the front, and then I'm going to take my front strip and I'm going to put that right sides together with the front of the quilt, making sure that all edges are nice and level, and then I'm going to pin all layers together. So the seam with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Flip the borders out and press. Open up the borders and slip a piece of batting in between, aligning the edge of the batting with the edge of the seam allowance. Now we're going to join that with some batting joining tape. This is batting joining tape. I've used it in my videos before. It's a thin nylon tape. It's rough on one side, that's the glue side. This is a little bit too wide, so I've already cut a piece in half, and I'm going to place it with the glue side facing down and just lining it up with the stitching line. And then to protect my tape, which is a nylon, I'm going to flip the top strip over and press it. When I open up, you'll see that the batting is joined together with my edge of the quilt using the batting joining tape. Now mark quilting lines spaced 1 inch apart, starting at the seam using a fabric marker that you can easily erase from your fabric. Use safety pins to hold the layers together before you do the quilting. Quilt on the marked lines. I started my quilting lines above and below the actual size of my applique, and the reason why we start with our strips being that little bit bigger is because every time you quilt something it's going to shrink in a little bit. So now that I have completed my stitching, I can trim them level with the top and bottom edges of the applique. Now trim the excess batting, making sure that everything is nice and square and straight. Add a border onto the opposite side edge in the same way. Here's my next side border sewn on. Now sew a border onto the bottom edge and onto the top edge in the same way. Here are the top and bottom borders sewn on. Mark the 1 inch quilting lines, but this time extend them from the side edge up and across. This way it's going to look as though our quilting lines are sewn in one continuous line going all the way around the quilt. When you sew the quilting lines, start level with your side quilting lines and overlap the stitching line just a little bit and start and finish with those small stitches that I showed in quilting the Fifi Flamingo applique pattern. The quilt start at the side where your quilting line is, bring your bobbin thread up to the top, start with some small stitches, so 6 or 7 stitches sewn very close together, and away you go, sewing, continuing sewing up and across or along your border. Here's our first row of borders sewn around the edge of Fifi Flamingo. This is what it looks like from the back. And now I will continue sewing on my darker border strips in the same way. Second border finished. This is what it looks like from the back. And now I'm going to sew on a third row of borders using the light fabrics again. And here's my third Quilt As You Go border. I love the definition between the light pink and dark pink borders, and also alternating between light and dark borders means that you won't ever have the same two fabrics meeting next to each other when the next border is sewn on. You can achieve the same effect by alternating between different coloured fabrics, say for instance like pink and green. You can keep adding borders and make your quilt any size that you like. Your applique doesn't even have to end up in the centre depending on where you sew your borders. The possibilities with this quilt are endless. You can even use different coloured fabric strips for the back of the quilt. I've had the idea for this quilt in my mind for a really long time, and I've got to say I absolutely loved making it. So if you would like to make one of these quilts for yourself, here are my tips. When trimming, make sure that all fabric edges are level, as in the top, batting and backing, to make sure that all fabric edges will be caught in the seam. Check each seam before you sew on the next, and when trimming, make sure that you use the lines on your ruler to make sure that your quilt edges are square. And last of all, here's a quilt that I have finished with the Easy Quilt-as-you-go border, just using one fabric. You could add multiple borders if you like. If you did have a quilt that you wanted to enlarge and you hadn't already put the binding on, you could easily use this method to make it bigger with the Easy Quilt-as-you-go border. If you enjoy learning with me, why not subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the notification button so that you don't ever miss a video. Thanks for watching, bye!